Hola clase, bienvenidos. Hoy vamos a hablar sobre los complementos indirectos en español. Okay, so the topic for today is indirect object nouns and indirect object pronouns. I know in Unit 1 we talked about direct object pronouns, okay, and we will compare and contrast those with indirect object pronouns today. Okay, so indirect objects answer the questions to whom or for whom. Look at this sentence in green. She writes a letter to John. Let's break down this sentence. She is the subject. Writes is the verb. Okay, and then what we have left here is one is a direct object and one is an indirect object. So if you think back, a direct object is the who or the what of the verb. So what does she write? A letter. So a letter is the direct object. Who does she write it to? To John. So John is the indirect object. Okay. Just like with direct objects, if you have an indirect object pronoun, it will replace the indirect object noun. So look at my sentence here. I give her a ticket. I is the subject. Give is the verb. What do I give her? A ticket. Ticket is the direct object. And who do I give it to? Her. Her is the indirect object. In my sentence here, en español, yo le doy un boleto. I give her a ticket. My indirect object pronoun, le, has replaced her. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about indirect object pronouns in a minute here. The last thing you should know about indirect objects before moving on is that a sentence that contains an indirect object also has a direct object in it. Look at the sentence here. He brings me the uniform. He is the subject. Brings is the verb. What does he bring? The uniform. So uniform is the direct object. And who does he bring it to? Me. Okay, so me is the indirect object. Okay, so if a sentence has an indirect object in it, there's also a direct object. Sometimes that direct object will be implied. For example, listen to this sentence. I write you. Okay, there my direct object, I write you, was implied. Okay, maybe I write you a text message, or I write you an email, a letter, etc. Okay, let's practice identifying indirect object pronouns. I would like you to pause me, and on your note guide, in the spaces provided, please write down what you believe is the indirect object in each sentence. Okay, let's review our answers. He sends you text messages. You is the indirect object. Okay, he is the subject, sends is the verb. What does he send? Text messages. Who does he send them to? You. You is the indirect. Okay, I'll do number 2 in detail as well. She sells the pictures to her friends. Okay, she is the subject. Sells is the verb. What does she sell? Pictures. So pictures is the direct object. And to her friends is the indirect object. Okay, and number 3, us is the indirect object. In number 4, my parents is the indirect object. And in 5, me is the indirect object. Okay, so hopefully you now have an understanding of what an indirect object noun is. Okay, and now we can talk a little bit more about indirect object pronouns. Okay, you have a chart on your note guide. Please fill in the English translation for these indirect object pronouns in Spanish. Me means to or for me. Te means to or for you. Le means to or for you, him, or it. Nos means to or for us. Os means to or for you, plural, in Spain. and les means to or for you, plural, or to or for them. When you go to use an indirect object pronoun, or what I like to call an IDOP, in a sentence, you have to think about location. Okay, so this is going to be the same pronoun rule that we had with DOPs. When you have one verb, your IDOP is going to go right before that conjugated verb. So let's look at this sentence. Yo te compro un boleto. I buy you a ticket. Okay, your IDOP is right here before the conjugated verb compro. What if I have two verbs in a sentence? Well, just like direct object pronouns, I have two options. I can place the IDOP before the first verb, so before the conjugated verb, or I can attach it to the second verb. Okay, so in this sentence, yo te puedo escribir una carta, I can write you a letter. Two options as to where you can put the te. Okay, a few other things we need to know about using indirect object pronouns before we go on to our examples. In Spanish, the IDOP must accompany the indirect object noun it modifies. The IDOP can be used to replace the indirect object noun. Okay, and something that is a little bit confusing for us as English speakers is the usage of the IDOP is not optional. Okay, however, the indirect object noun is. You use the indirect object noun for clarification. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that here in these two sentences. Look at this first sentence. I give the money to John. Here, the indirect object noun, Juan, accompanies this sentence purely to clarify who I give the money to. Look at this sentence to contrast it. I give the money, and then you've got lay. Lay means to him, for him, to her, for her, to it, for it, to you, formal. Okay, so, gosh, I don't know exactly what the lay is standing for there. Therefore, I've included the indirect object noun with it. Okay, so again, let's look at the English comparisons. This says, I give the money to John. The lay, which is the IDOP, must accompany the indirect object noun in the sentence. This lay is not optional. What is optional is the Juan. Okay, so this is the optional part, just used for clarification. So again, this says, I give the money to John. Whereas this sentence says, I give the money to him. Okay, we don't know exactly who him is unless we decide to use the indirect object noun, Juan, with it. Okay, so what you should know is that the IDOP, the me, te, le, nos, os, or les, is a requirement. You have to use it. What is optional is the with the indirect object noun. Okay, let's do some practice and see if we understood that. Complete these sentences with the correct IDOP. We're going to do the first two together, and then I'm going to let you do 3, 4, 5, and 6 on your own. So let's read here. John gives the ticket to me. Okay, so John is the subject, gives is the verb. What does John give? The ticket. So there's your direct object. Who does he give it to? To me. Okay, so what IDOP means to me? Look on your chart. Okay, you should have come up with me. Juan me da el boleto a mí. Let's do number 2. My mom tells the story to us. Okay, so my mom is the subject. Tells is the verb. What does mom tell? The story. Okay, so there's your direct object. Who does she tell it to? To us. So a nosotros. So look on your IDOP chart. How do you say to us? You should have come up with nos. Mi mamá nos dice el cuento a nosotros. Okay, go ahead and pause me and work through numbers 3 to 6. Okay, repasemos. Number 3, I write a letter to you. The IDOP that means to you is te. Number 4, you send everything to your parents. The IDOP that means to them is les. Number 5, she serves the food to John. The IDOP that means to him is le. And lastly, I sell the tickets to my friend. The IDOP that means to him is le. Some of you may have picked up on a hint, an easy clue. Look here at these sentences. Do you see the word a in every sentence? A means to. So, here's a trick for you. If you want to know what the indirect object pronoun is, what the IDOP is, what you need to do is look for a and then the word that comes after it, because that is your indirect object noun. And remember that your IDOP has to match your indirect object noun. Okay? So, that may be a trick to help you do IDOPs pretty accurately and easily. Alright, let's practice writing on our own, and then we'll be done. Okay, translate these sentences. I wrote her a letter. She sent us a souvenir, and we bought them a ticket. We will do number 1 together. I wrote her a letter. Notice, these sentences are in the preterite. So, to write is escribir. In the yo form, you're going to have escribí. And then what did I write? A letter. Okay, so put una carta. So I wrote a letter. Escribí una carta. Who did I write this letter to? To her. Okay, so which IDOP means to her? Okay, it's le. And where does le go? I only have one verb here, so I need to put it in front. Okay, your answer should be le escribí una carta. Then, if you want, you can put a ella on the end. That's just to clarify. Okay, you don't need it. Okay, please pause me and do numbers 2 and 3. Okay, let's review. Number 2, she sent us a souvenir. Ella nos mandó un recuerdo. You could have put a nosotros on the end if you wanted to clarify. Lastly, we bought them a ticket. Les compramos un boleto. You could have put a ellos on the end to clarify. Okay, I know this was a new and challenging concept, so please take a minute, write down a comment or a question that you have on indirect object nouns or indirect object pronouns. You may also see the notes provided on page 46 of your textbook. Okay.